try it.
Okay, testing, testing, testing. Yeah, that seems okay. Can I move can I change the wire here a bit?
Sure. Just try.
Testing, testing. Is that okay?
I think so.
Yeah,
Maybe try a little louder.
testing. Yeah, that seems okay.
Yes. Start.
Is there a mute button?
Yes.
Okay, good evening. Can everyone hear me okay? Good? Okay, thank you very much. Well, good evening and welcome to the discussion tonight on philosophy and the digital. Thank you very much indeed for coming. Thank you for braving the rain, the darkness, the very long day at the Congress. I know people have been giving papers, people have been listening to papers. Thank you so much for giving us your time and attention tonight. So my name is Mark Sprevak. I am a philosopher at the University of Edinburgh. I work on philosophy of mind, philosophy of cognition, philosophy of science, and more recently on artificial intelligence, on AI. So I'm actually filling in this evening for Professor Martin Kusch from the University of Vienna, who very sadly couldn't be here at the conference. He would have been absolutely terrific at this. So unfortunately, you've got me as your next best alternative. So I'm going to ask you to try to please bear with me if I make any mistakes or get anything wrong, because unfortunately, I'm not Martin, but I'll do the best I can. So let me just say a little bit about the format for tonight. The idea, I think, of the Congress organisers is that we're going to have a conversation among our speakers for the first part of the session. And then after about maybe an hour or 45 minutes, we're going to open up for questions and discussion with the audience. So we'd really value your input, your thoughts on these topics. So without any further ado, let me briefly introduce our three guest speakers. So first, we have Manuela Lenzen here, sitting in the middle. So Manuela is a freelance science journalist, and she specializes in evolution, cognition, and artificial intelligence. She's also a part-time member of the Center for Interdisciplinary Research in Bielefeld, the ZIF. Among her many books are Der elektronische Spiegel and Künstliche Intelligenz. Is that okay? Yeah, just checking my German pronunciation isn't too awful. Welcome to Manuela. On Manuela's left is Aram Sinnreich. So Aram is professor at American University in Washington, D.C. So his work focuses on the intersection of technology, law, and culture. And Aram is also a musician, so music gets worked into the mix too. So his recent books include The Secret Life of Data, Navigating Hype and Uncertainty in the Age of Algorithmic Surveillance, something we all need to know. And he's also recently published a science fiction novel called A Second Chance for Yesterday. So welcome to Aram. And on my left is P. Telakivi. So P is a philosopher and a postdoc at the University of Turku in Finland. She also works at the Department of Practical Philosophy at the University of Helsinki in the research group called RADAR, which stands for Robo-Philosophy, AI Ethics and Datafication Research. She's recently published an excellent book called Extending the Extended Mind from Cognition to Consciousness. So those are our three speakers. So welcome to them. So tonight we're going to focus on philosophy of AI. Okay, so we're going to take this theme of philosophy in the digital, and we're going to specifically focus on artificial intelligence. Now, AI has obviously become a huge industry which is touching all of our lives in different ways. But we're going to take as our starting point today the form of AI that's kind of the most exciting, that's being talked about most, which is generative artificial intelligence. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at some of the ethics, some of the political philosophy, some of the metaphysical issues, and some of the epistemological issues specifically associated with generative artificial intelligence. So before we can even get into that, we need to sort of agree on a rough understanding of what we mean by generative artificial intelligence. So what is this sort of special form of artificial intelligence? Manuela, do you want to start us off?
Thanks a lot, I can try. Yes, the term generative artificial intelligence came up recently. It is not a very clear term. It came up with the chatbots as ChatGPT. Maybe you even ask yourself what this GPT stands for. It's a generative pre-trained transformer. So we have a transformer architecture. It's an architecture of an artificial neural network. And it generates something. That's a G in GPT. That means it generates text, it generates pictures, it generates even videos. And it's important that the new systems even can mix the different modalities. So you give it a text and it produces a video, or it produces a picture. You give it a picture and it produces a text. And I said it's not a very clear term, because what is the opposite? The opposite is sometimes called analytic or discriminative AI. And that is meant to be systems which analyze data, find structures in these data, and can forecast what happens next. But also, if you ask such an analytic system, this analytic system will generate an answer to your question. So the terminology is not that clear. What is important, that it is an artificial neural network system. That means it is not programmed sentence by sentence. You do not tell the system, birds can fly and planes can fly, but birds fly by flapping their wings and planes do not fly by flapping their wings. But you give it examples and you give it feedback about the quality of the results. And by this so-called training process, it will get better and better. And if you decide it's good enough, then you can freeze it and you can basically sell it or use it or whatever. And that comes with some philosophically interesting points, because that also means that the results are often very good, but sometimes they are not very reliable. Sometimes they do strange things. They excel in difficult questions, but they have problems with very basic things, so that one sometimes wonders how they come to their results. Yeah, maybe that's for the first try to get closer to generative AI.
That's excellent. P or Aram, do you want to add anything to how you would define generative AI?
Sure. I think that's maybe the best definition I've ever heard from Manuela. So I wouldn't extend the definition, but rather to say that I think the structural description of what generative AI consists of, which Manuela just delivered, is very much orthogonal to the social and cultural reception of GAI, which has all of these it's the classic Silicon Valley technology in search of a use case. And so it's been inserted into all of these use cases that nobody really asked for. In many cases, it's the world's greatest bullshit machine, which is saying a lot because human beings have excelled at creating machines like that for millennia. And in other cases, it's more of a prosthetic. It's something that gets integrated into tasks that are either burdensome or difficult for human beings in order to make those tasks easier for a larger number of people. And the social consequences of that cut in two ways. One is it provides greater accessibility to computing systems and to cultural platforms and communications platforms for people who lack accessibility, and that is a clear social benefit. But it also constrains people's behaviors in ways that maybe limit their space of agency and limit the range of voices and perspectives that get included in those media production platforms and those communication platforms, which I would argue is as close as we can get to a consensual social negative. So when we talk about, and then of course it's also, as Mark mentioned in his introduction, it's an industry. And when you say it's a big industry, it's big in the sense that hundreds of billions of dollars have been invested in it, but it's not very big in that it doesn't yet have, because there's no clear use case, there's also no clear business model. And I'm very concerned about what the actual profitable business model for these systems might be, which we can talk about more together at length.
Yeah, that's a great point, that it's a massive bet that people are actually going to use this stuff. And it's often an interesting question to ask people, how do you use something like ChatGPT in your work? And often people kind of struggle. They often find it a bit of a barrier rather than something that actually makes their life easier. So there's a bet that these systems will eventually become more useful. So we're all familiar with things like ChatGPT, large language models, but are there any other fun examples of generative AI systems or promising AI systems which are not just kind of, ChatGPT?
Well, one thing that I've been very interested about lately is therapy chatbots. So, of course, mental health care is in crisis globally. And that's why these companies have seen that there is clearly a big market. And this is a very, very interesting case of generative AI. So what these things really are, what are they doing? And actually, I have to admit that many of them are not even using generative AIs. They are not using large language models, but many of them still function with quite simple rule-based systems, but this is going to change. There's already some applications out there that run with LLMs, and this is definitely the way we are going, and the whole mental health care systems are going to.
P, wasn't the very first chatbot a mental health chatbot? Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of Eliza.
Yeah, Eliza, that's correct.
Yeah. So, and there have been really, cool applications with using generative AI to generate movie clips. So you can generate movie clips from still images. You can generate computer code. So you can write a description in German or in English of what you want a program to do, and then it'll generate the code to do it. You can generate music. So you can say what sort of music you would like. How does it perform?
Well, to answer that thoroughly would take more time than we have, but I'll say that within music scholarship, there's been a real move away from thinking of music as a noun, which kind of privileges its commodity form, and starting to think of music as a verb, which privileges its ritual and communicative elements. And I would say that generative AI is very good at producing a simulacrum of a commodity. It's not so good at producing communication.
Great answer. Okay, so that sort of mapped out a little bit of what generative AI is and sort of examples of generative AI. Let's do a little bit of kind of crystal ball gazing and think about what the next 20 years might hold. So what, in your view, would be like best case and worst case scenarios for generative AI technology in the next 20 years?
So it seems to me that we are witnessing a kind of drawback from this idea that we can get a kind of general artificial intelligence with the help of these learning systems with machine learning. This kind of general artificial intelligence was for a longest time not regarded as something one could realistically follow, and with these learning systems upcoming, people started to think then maybe we are now a big step closer to these general systems. But it seems that now the problems these systems have become obvious. They become more and more obvious. And what we see now is that these systems are more and more combined with more traditional, so to say, forms of programming with knowledge graphs. And compound systems or neurosymbolic systems are created, which means that the learning part, the neurosystems are used to understand language, to transform a request which is uttered in natural language to a request which can be posed to a knowledge graph. And in this knowledge graph, you find information which is sure. So you have to program all the data you know about the world into this knowledge graph. Then in this knowledge graph, you can look up, or the system can look up the answer, and the answer will be given again to an artificial neural network, which will then utter an answer in natural language. So I think we will see the system stepping back from this approach of having a general artificial intelligence more towards specialized systems, which are chatbots, which are information systems specialized, I don't know, maybe for universities or for companies or whatever one can imagine. But this tendency is going back from these general systems and coming to these specialists we wanted to overcome.
That's great. So you're betting against OpenAI. So OpenAI, they're promising that their generative models are a stepping stone on the way to general intelligence, and you think, no, you're not going to get there that way.
Yeah.
Good.
I think there are maybe more interesting approaches if one wants to aim towards general artificial intelligence, but I personally would look for them in the direction of embodied, situated artificial intelligence. That is basic research nowadays, and we cannot tell if this kind of research is leading towards household robots or autonomous cars or whatever, which is promised since a long time. But I think if aiming for an AI which is maybe not even general but more human-like, that would also be a big step forward. Then one should maybe look in this direction and not in the direction of bringing even more and more data to even bigger data centers and having the idea that this is getting us closer to general intelligence.
Well, I could mention one risk that I've been thinking about. So just this, like all our skills we have, because with these general AI apps, we can substitute so many of our things, our skills with those technologies. So, for example, learning languages. why would people do that anymore if you can just use a translator app in 5 seconds? And yes, so that's sort of a big worry, this cognitive atrophy. And I think we need to be very careful which skills we want to give away to these technologies. And of course they can be used in a beneficial way. It's not like if we have a very, very good AI translator, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily a bad thing, because it depends how you're using it. And so you can just like offload the whole task to it, or you can use it as more like a scaffold, as your cognitive scaffolding, that you just get better translations from it, like quicker. So it really depends like how you're using it. Also, who is using it. It's not the same for everybody. So if you are like a white, educated young male, you are in good position as usually in life. And if you're in the countryside of Zimbabwe, it's a very, very different story. And also in what society, if you're in democratic Germany, that's great. But what if you're in China or in some other place where you're, then you're in much worse positions with these technologies.
I've spilled a lot of ink recently talking about the potential harms of generative AI, and I'll start out by saying that I think your time frame is optimistic. 20 years, like we have no idea what 20 years from now is going to look like. But what I'm worried about in the next 5 years, I'd say the number one concern that I have about generative AI is that I mentioned before that it hasn't found a use case yet, and it hasn't found a profit model yet. And these companies are going to want to profit very soon before the banks come calling. And I think that the biggest short-term market is probably in mass state surveillance. If you think about it, one thing that ChatGPT is very, very good at is integrating a large and heterogeneous library of content, of information, and distilling it down to bullet points. And in intelligence, we call that a dossier. And historically, surveillance-based regimes were limited in the scope of their surveillance because, the Stasi could only follow one person down the street at a time, right? So there was a human labor barrier to a total surveillance state. And I think that the development of generative AI eliminates that barrier. And that it's very likely that despotic and authoritarian regimes are already recognizing this. I know that, from my research that in the US, the domestic intelligence agencies already have basically a Facebook graph style infrastructure where they can choose any individual and see their web of relations and track all of the interactions that they've had with those relations on trackable platforms going back for years and just call it forth. Imagine adding to that kind of feature set the ability to get a dossier that summarizes all of the surveilled information about them and distills it into a key point, and then recommends how disinformation might be effectively targeted toward them, or how they might be effectively scapegoated in order to remove them from a position of authority, or how discord could be sown between them and their family, their friends, and their professional relations. All the dirty tricks of authoritarian surveillance states, but with the added bonus of no limitation on the human labor that goes into assembling and exploiting those dossiers. The other main concern I have in the very short term is the consequence of what P was talking about, which is this notion that we're very busy outsourcing knowledge labor the way that more recent industrial innovations have outsourced manual labor to machines. But we're not really outsourcing it to machines. We're outsourcing it to large corporations that have amassed monopolies over the uses of these machines and are despoiling our global environment and our global economic systems in order to accomplish that monopolization. So what I'm concerned about is a wholesale transfer of wealth from functional economies consisting of laborers and capital and institutions, and towards a tiny handful of of processing, computer processing monopolists, and what the social effects of that might be.
So that's great. So we're looking at a very dark future here. So there's a tendency for discussions about AI, specifically AI ethics, to take on a kind of a dystopian tinge where we focus on the risks, and the risks are absolutely there. And maybe, maybe those risks are going to be realized in the future, which is, kind of worrisome. But what would you guys think about best case scenarios? So there's got to be some sort of possible futures out there where it's more than just making money for big tech companies. So what would be the best case scenario for development for generative AI?
I think there are already a lot of use cases which are not always in the media, which are not so interesting maybe for the large public, but which are nevertheless helping, especially in science. Making research faster, making hopefully also development of medication faster. And there are really fascinating developments. Maybe it's not only generative AI, but there are complex models which take parts from different technologies. Maybe one example is the so-called swarm learning. So if you have a hospital, then you have data of your patients, but normally you do not have enough data to train your own system. But nevertheless, you cannot give the data away because patient data are specially protected. So what can you do? And then the swarm learning people developed a technology that works in a way that several hospitals form a so-called swarm, and they do not exchange their data, but they exchange the program. So you have a program which goes to the different members of the swarm and is trained there with the data the different hospitals have. They cannot train that system very well, but they can train it a bit, and then they give it back. Not the data, but only the trained system. They give it back to the center of the swarm, and then they can build a kind of mathematical average. And that is nearly as good as if they would have trained the program with all the data from all the hospitals together.
Can I respond to that with a little darkness?
No,
please.
We want to feel upbeat here.
So I agree with everything that you just said, and it's important to look for silver linings. But as for this notion that data can be sequestered within training models and we can distribute the benefits of those training models without de-anonymizing or differentiating the data that was used to train them, is already demonstrated not to be true. For instance, computer scientists have reverse engineered, I think it was DALL-E, but it might have been Midjourney, but one of the text-to-image GAI platforms, and have identified just on the basis of of mapping queries and outputs what the photographs in the original training set looked like. So if we can do that with photographs, we can also do that with medical records, right? Like that. Once data has been abstracted and integrated, doesn't mean that the process can't be reverse engineered to de-identify or re-identify the original component data in the system. So I think we need to tread very carefully when we're talking about data as sensitive as medical or biometric data.
Okay, I have one example that is more like we are all aware of this probably. So as you know, everybody can now create language, images, music, probably other things too with these apps. And of course, this is a big risk for the creative industries. You could also say to liberal arts, but I would be a little bit more skeptical about that. But at least it makes things more equal. So I wasn't able to write poems before, but now I am. And I can't draw, I can't make music, but now I can. And with the help of these tools. So everybody can try out. And if I get more interested in that, then I might do some real music with the help or without that app. So I think there are good sides in these apps too, because and also one thing is that not everybody's perfect at writing, and especially if you're for example in English, if your native language is not English, now you can write in perfect English like emails, and whatever you want to write. So these apps are also making more equal some things.
Yeah, I often wonder about the kind of the barrier to entry into kind of the scientific community. So thinking about communities spread across the world, where the barrier to entry is that you need to have working understanding of, you know, a language such as English, which is going to enable you to read articles and to publish articles and to communicate with other folks. Well, maybe that barrier to entry is going to disappear or substantially decrease, that, you know, there'll be going to be lots more people able to participate in the scientific community, and that's going to, you know, that, to my mind, that could possibly be a great revolutionary thing.
I mean, I'm flashing back to what Walter Benjamin said 90 years ago about the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, and how it was going to be the harbinger of this wonderful socialist age, because everybody would have access to, you know, to the same culture, and it would lose, you know, the tyranny of aura, and then, you know, that prediction was immediately followed by the tyranny of Hollywood. So, I mean, you know, like, all power to it, but I'm skeptical that if the means of production are monopolized, that the cultural consequences can be democratizing.
Good. So let's switch gears and think about metaphysics for a little bit. So these generative AI systems like ChatGPT, they're quite peculiar kinds of entities, and it's difficult to pin down what is ChatGPT. So how do you think we should think about this? So there are a number of kind of proposals out there in the literature. So one idea is to think of these as just tools. So they're just like more sophisticated forms of hammers. You know, they're just helping us to get intellectual labor done. Are they tools? Are they what Mustafa Suleiman's called a new digital species, so a new kind of organism which is out there in the world? Are they social actors? Are they agents in our world? Are they tutors? Should we view them as kind of personal assistants or chiefs of staff who are going to somehow mediate our interactions with other people, gatekeepers of our interactions with other people? So what sort of entities are they? What's their metaphysics in your view?
So I would say that they are not just tools, but they are not agents either. So I would say that they are something between a tool and an agent. So they're clearly not like hammer is a tool. So they are closer to what have been called as cognitive tools. Like when we have a pen and paper, we're writing out something we need to remember, that can be considered as a cognitive tool. Or when we have a map, that's also a cognitive tool. Or when we have a calculator, that kind of things are called cognitive tools. So these apps are clearly something more. And what else they are not these autonomous AI systems or robots. And here by autonomous now I mean as it defined in robotics. So like when we have a robot Hoover that works autonomously without us doing it together, or when we have a delivery robot. So these are something different because they are something that we use. And they are not social in the same way as we are between humans, but we often see them. Or if we build a relationship like with a avatar or AI companions like Replica, we start to see them as another with the big letter. So even though they are not agents, we perceive them as if they were agents sometimes. So they are this very, very peculiar kind of thing that have this nature that we don't know yet where it's going, but it's clearly not, they're not like full agents. They're clearly not full moral agents, that's clear, but they're still above zero. There's something more than what we have, what we're used to thinking that tools are. So very, very interesting things.
I think I would advocate the tool perspective, and maybe for didactic reasons. because I think this technology is very, it's confusing us about what we are dealing with. And maybe it's because we look from all the backgrounds we have, so humanity is thinking about building artificial humans and automata since 2,500 years or so. And everything that comes out of the labs of AI research, we see that through the lens of all these stories that has been told since antiquity up to science fiction of our days. And the other point is this what is called anthropomorphizing these systems. So humans are very easily trapped into anthropomorphizing everything from pets to cars to, of course, robots or systems which are specially designed to make us step into this kind of trap. But I think stepping into this trap makes us thinking of more than there really is. That they are tools, and we should be careful not to think that they are humans, that they are social partners or things like this. I mean, I know that there is this perspective of taking a cognitive abbreviation, so to say, so it's that complicated to always have a clear picture in mind what we are dealing with, and when this chatbot is answering in a very smooth and intelligent way, then why not deal with it with other people or so. But that's already taking us into this trap of seeing more in the system than there is in the system, and that's not that matters, because what we think of these systems makes us also decide where we can use the systems. And we should be very careful with these decisions, which systems can be used, in which context, and maybe in which context it should better not be used.
I love this question because I don't know the answer to it. And I when you talk, I want to believe what you're saying, and when you talk, I want to believe what you're saying. And I'm of at least two minds. On the like 70% of me thinks that the closest analogy for AI would be something like a bureaucracy or an ideological institution like a church. Because what it does is it creates exogenous categories into which and then it disciplines us to fit our lives into those exogenous categories that are produced by this totalizing and largely increasingly invisible machine that's been integrated into all these aspects of our lives that we have no say over. So, like I'm from the US, very new country, New York City, I visit a place like Münster, it becomes very evident to me how central the church was in shaping the architecture of this city. And people from Münster probably don't notice it until they travel to someplace like New York, which is, of course, has a very different architecture, right? And so that invisibility of the discipline that's baked into the ideological institution of the church, I think is very analogous to the way in which AI, you already look at how autocorrect tries to write your emails for you, or like how these new cars try to keep you in your lane as you're driving, right? These little nudges that get you to think about yourself as a certain category and to therefore behave in a certain way, to me are the hallmarks of GAI as it's been adopted so far. And then the other 30% of me thinks, and this you guys are the experts much more than me, and I'd be very curious to hear what you think about this. And you and I already talked a little bit about this over coffee, which we swore not to do. But I think maybe human intelligence itself is just an assemblage and a social construct, and that there's no a priori basis to differentiate what our brains do from what GAI does in the first place.
Well, if I can add one more thing to this, or rather to this tool agent thing. So if we get back to the therapy chatbots that I mentioned, and okay, let's say that they are tools, but since we perceive them as agents, well, okay, first of all, there is this risk like you said, when they anthropomorphize them, when there is this phenomenological transparency, emotional transparency, it's very risky because, of course, they're not real, like it's not a real therapist, so they don't really empathize for us. But it might be still necessary that we perceive them as agents, because that has been proved to be actually the essential part why therapy works. So this bond between the patient and her therapist. So this emotional empathy relationship. This is called one of the common elements that has been shown to be the core element that makes all different types of therapy work. So if these therapy chatbots, if they have any chance, maybe they need to mimic this relationship. And I don't know if this mimicking is enough, but to get even closer, it might be necessary that we perceive them as agents, even though that is very dangerous thing to do for other reasons. And clearly they're not real agents, but there is this weird situation with these kind of tools. I actually don't call them tools, I call them artifacts rather, and they have been referred to as cognitive affective artifacts. So they have sort of a little bit more power than just like a hammer kind of tools.
Maybe some human therapists are only mimicking their empathy as well.
That is true.
Well,
but
that was
then,
my point, right? Like, on what basis do we get to claim the a priori humanity of humanness, given that all the evidence points to us producing the same kinds of inputs and outputs that these systems that we've designed are capable of producing?
yes, but then when we have one therapist, she can take maybe, 100 patients. But when we have Wobot, that kind of app, it has millions of users. So, yeah, scaling up.
Let's think about the epistemology now. So there was a really interesting article in Nature magazine this month, which I'm not sure you've come across, about this new large language model called the AI scientist. Okay, so what the AI scientist is advertised to do, so it's a joint creation of a Japanese, UK and Canadian team. And what it's advertised to do is automate the entire cycle of scientific research. So it basically reads the literature for you, it comes up with hypotheses for you, it writes the papers for you, it checks the papers for you, it submits the papers for you, it'll even, write the referees' reports for you as well. So the idea is that you just press a button and then it completely automates end-to-end the scientific research process. So what if you have exclusive use, you can make millions. So what do you think of the potential for generative AI and scientific research?
So I must confess I didn't read the paper because I started and then I saw that it has more than 150 pages and I postponed it for later. But I read the commentaries which are around and they said what's more or less all the time said about the systems, that the ideas the systems come up with are not that original. So they try to find very small pieces in very specialized areas, maybe in chemistry or in material science or so, and there they find little points which are not yet researched, which are not yet, or where the research is not yet published, and they have very tiny hypotheses, so to say, which they elaborate on and which they produce these papers on. So I think that maybe they can help to be faster. I always hear from being a journalist, I talk to scientists and I always hear that most of them, even in the natural sciences, think that they will work faster when they use the systems, to find gaps in the literature or to get papers summarized and so on, so that they will come up with new research ideas faster when using the systems, but that they do not think that they're no longer needed, that the systems will come up with more interesting, with more complex research ideas by themselves. So I think humanity or humans are bored very easily. So I think they will always try to get one step further than the systems are able to go. And I hope that will save, I think that will save the development of more interesting research questions, of really new projects, and not only of filling in the little gaps, which of course should be filled in, and which of course these systems can do, because science can also be very boring when testing millions and millions of combinations of molecules to see if there are certain desired things with these molecules. Yeah, but I think the development of really new research ideas will, at least for the next future, stick to humans.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one thing I would like to add is that we are all scientists here, or philosophers, but we are also humans. So it's not that we're somehow completely away from this world of science or academia. We are human beings, we're embodied beings and biological beings, and things really matter to us. So our ultimate need is to survive and stay alive, and that's why these things matter to us in a way that can never be done with this AI scientist. So that's why it's going to be different. So whatever this AI scientist is able to do, it's not going to be science as we know it, because how we do science, it's basically a human thing. It's a part of human culture. When you go deep down. Actually, here in this panel yesterday, in this same night talk, there was a talk about diversity in philosophy. And one of the panelists mentioned that even though often philosophers want to think that there is this completely objective, abstract area of philosophy out there and that I should be there, but that's not the case. But we are our persons, and you cannot split your person away from that, what you do in research. So that really affects what you're doing. So this part is completely missing in this AI scientist, and it cannot be substituted with any Gen AIs.
That's interesting. So there's maybe an analogy to what happened in chess, where chess is basically solved from the point of view that you can have strong AI systems that are going to beat the human, but it's not that people have stopped playing chess or stopped developing new chess strategies, because the strategies that the AI systems develop are very, very different from the ones that humans develop. So it's interesting for humans and to develop new strategies. So the kinds of, as you say, the kinds of science that humans are going to do will be different from the kinds that AI systems are going to do, and may have its own value. Sorry, Aram.
No, not at all. No, I agree with everything that all three of you have said. Right, GAI literally works on the basis of regression toward the mean. So GAI authored science is going to aim to fine-tune what's already been discovered. GAI is not embodied, so it's not going to have the same pressing existential needs underpinning its agendas. And therefore, it's unlikely to replace human scientists in any meaningful way, although it might make the work of human scientists easier in some ways. I think thus far, the most interesting consequence of AI for the sciences has not been in generating new knowledge, but in dispelling old knowledge. So one of the things that large language models are incredibly good at, as we've talked about, is sifting through diverse arrays of literature and finding correspondences and patterns, and also finding errors. And so there have been, right now, as many of you probably know, there's a massive reproducibility crisis, not just in the sciences, but in all empirical research, where people are now using these models to go back and say, okay, you published these models, these numbers, where result X is 2.4%, result Y is 3.7%. Well, actually, now that we run it through the model, there's no conceivable universe that could have produced those numbers. Therefore, there's a fundamental flaw in your research. And furthermore, it doesn't correspond with these 3 other sources that all find statistically similar findings, right? So by some measures, the majority of empirical research that's been published in peer-reviewed journals is not up to snuff, can't be reproduced. The numbers don't work, and the empirical conclusions that are drawn from it are invalid. And I think it's going to be, in the short term, very painful across a lot of different fields to have to take such a huge step back from standing on the shoulders of giants and moving the fields forward. But I think that there's actually, and this is one of the silver linings that we can talk about, once we've addressed this reproducibility crisis, there's an opportunity for us to do a better job producing empirical work that you can actually build a foundation upon. And that'll probably have accelerative properties over the longer term, where we innovate much faster than we would have otherwise, because we eliminate errors earlier on in the process.
So before we open up for questions, I want to just consider one last question, and bearing in mind that this is a philosophy congress. So so far we've been talking about AI and various things that AI might or might not be able to do for us, but you might wonder, well, what can we learn about human intelligence from AI? So how might it change, for example, the way in which we do philosophy? So as philosophers, we want to understand how human intelligence works, how the human mind works, how you should divide up the mind into various different faculties and different states and processes. How might the work taking place in AI change the way in which we do cognitive science, or the way in which we do philosophy of mind?
I think one interesting result when looking back to the history of AI is that our concept of intelligence changed in a way. So when they started in the 50s with the first research programs in artificial intelligence, they had this idea that humans are transparent in a way to themselves, though that every aspect of human cognition can be described so precisely that a machine can be made to simulate it. And it became clear very fast, and it becomes clear even today that we do not understand natural cognition well enough so that we can simply take a sharp look at a human or at an animal which does interesting things, and what we see then when we take this sharp look, we only have to program into a machine, and then the machine is intelligent. It doesn't work that way. So there are things we can spell out that are the things we learn at school, at the universities and so on, which we have to work hard to learn. That are the things we can program more or less easily into a machine. And then there are all these things we cannot explain. How can we distinguish cats from dogs, or how do we recognize a person in a crowd of people? That are things which happen to us, but we can listen to our thoughts. We will not find an answer to that. And it seems that the problems the large language models have, making these strange mistakes, may point towards aspects of intelligence which cannot be neglected if we really want to have intelligent systems in a human way. And that means that intelligence maybe is not a thing individuals do in their heads, like it is tested in intelligence tests, but something that people do which have bodies which are around in an environment, and which have other social beings in their environment, which have their childhood. And it seems that all these aspects cannot be left out when we want to create really, so to say, artificial intelligence systems. And I think that's already a kind of interesting change in the perspective. In the 50s, we started with the lonely thinker as this idea of intelligence, as this iconic figure of intelligence. And I think we should replace, after 70 years of artificial intelligence research, we should replace this icon with a picture of a playground where a lot of kids are around and running and interacting and playing. And when you are through all this, through this childhood, and if you have interacted enough with other people, with other social beings, then you can sit and do your own philosophy at your own table. But in the end, there are a lot of aspects of which make intelligence possible. And artificial intelligence, or the flaws of artificial intelligence, the problems the large language models have till today, they make us aware what is really important for human intelligence. And I think that's not a small idea.
I fully agree. That was great, and I think this is not so much about philosophy of mind, because I think philosophers of mind have been quite aware of these things for a long time. So we can think about Chinese room experiment or that kind of things. But what has happened in the last couple of years, also the big audience have suddenly become aware of this. And it has been quite amazing how suddenly everybody is interested in philosophy of mind. I've been doing philosophy of mind all my career, and now suddenly everybody out there is interested in that. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, I think these things that what we can now learn from ChatGPT or that kind of things, it's not something new for philosophers of mind as such, but something that now everybody is talking about.
So I'm not a philosopher or a cognitive scientist. I'm a social and cultural researcher. So what I can say is some of the recent work that I published is not about the theory of mind, but about the theory of meaning. And that that ChatGPT and other LLM and GAI's theory of meaning is fundamentally at odds with human theories of meaning. Because the way that these systems are currently designed, and as far as I understand, the only architecture that currently exists for any kind of generative AI is a very linear denotative system of signification in which there is a signifier and it represents a signified. And this has all kinds of problems, right? The chief being that, like, human beings use one signifier to represent a range of different signified that have ineffable relationships between them, some of which are obvious and some of which are obscure, and that a signified in turn can be represented by a range of different signifiers, which say more about the person communicating, the people communicating, than it does about the object being communicated about. And none of that is captured in the architecture of GAI. And one of the consequences of that, one of the social consequences of this linear denotative theory of meaning, is that it amplifies stereotypes by arguing that, you know, a single attribute or a single object or a single person can only represent one concept or one category is the essence of social oppression. And it's what we've been fighting about, you know, from the Enlightenment onwards, or longer, depending on your social history. And you know, that stereotyping function is amplified by what Manuela was talking about before, which is this kind of mathematical regression toward the mean, which is used in order to choose the optimal signifier-signified relationship in a GAI system. So it's not just that it's one meaning, but it's the most hegemonic meaning possible that gets encoded into these systems. And this becomes geometrically more of a challenge when you consider that human identity is intrinsically intersectional, right? So some colleagues and I just authored a paper where we talk about intersectional identities such as Jewish and queer, which two of my co-authors are, right? In all of the GAIs that we worked with, the construction of the identity Jewish and queer was an additive operation. Well, you have rainbow yarmulkes, right? Or you have like glittering gefilte fish, right? That's the way the GAI represents intersectionality. Whereas from an embodied vantage point and from any cultural vantage point in which intersectional identity matters, you are not adding, you are integrating. You're integrating multiple sites of oppression, really, because that's the definition of a minoritized identity, is to experience yourself as on the receiving end of an imbalanced power relationship. And intersectionality is a strategic form of identity formation that emerges from these intersecting sites of oppression. And therefore, the additive solution makes matters worse by misrepresenting the fundamental social function of identity, by reducing somebody to the Venn diagram of two hegemonic linear stereotypes. So I think this is an example of a much broader trend, and this is true of all generatively produced cultural expression, is that it is fundamentally impoverished in its theory of meaning on a level that cannot be improved just by adding more processing power or adding like an intersectionality module onto the GAI. In order for us to solve this problem, we would have to fundamentally re-architect the systems themselves from the ground up.
That's interesting. So let's open up for questions from the audience and discussion from the audience. So we have floating microphone traveling around, do we? Yeah. So Aram, maybe you can share with Manuela. You have to be silent for the rest of the evening. You can share with Manuela. So, is gentleman here, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Matthias Kettner, I'm philosopher at University Wittenherdecke. I found it interesting that I think you were referring to solutionism, without mentioning the word, but Evgeny Morozov's notion, that is the whole hype of AI and the huge industry in search of a business model and application. Now, I am worried that there is already a huge field of applications besides state surveillance. I think that was what you were hinting at, and that's the military. And none of you have been talking about military applications of AI, and I think this is a really fecund theme which we should be talking about. It's not represented in this Congress either, and I take this as a symptom. Okay, I'll rest with this. I have a comment to P, what you said about the positive aspect of using generative AI, for instance, in enhancing your abilities, for instance, to write poetry. That was your example. I'm a musician too, and now, if I use generative AI and say, please compose a 32-bar blues with lyrics that contains lyrics about Hegel's philosophy of spirit. This AI will do it, right? But does that, I mean, have I been transformed into being a musician? I would say no, or a songwriter. I would say no. My role was that of an operator of a music or a song generating machine, just like you producing poems by means of generative AI. You don't become a poet, you are an operator of a line producing system, and I think that's different from the other example you mentioned, which I fully agree with. Translation. That's immensely useful to be able to compensate for differences in language competence in certain contexts, simply linguistic barriers, yeah, just to get across this. But you see the difference to the poetry example. I mean, it doesn't make you a native speaker, the similarity in both examples is, in the translation case, it doesn't make you a native speaker. In the poetry case, it doesn't make you a poet.
No. Yes, thank you. That's a very good point. So I would be more skeptical with the latter, with the translator example as well. So if I use ChatGPT and ask it to write me a poem, I'm definitely not a poet. But let's think about that. We have a real poet who's using it to refine the poets, do some little changes, asking ideas, or helping her with her language or that kind of things. Then it is used as then they are actually, I would say that it's a hybrid system that consists this poet and this tool together. So it's sort of this extended system that is the poet. But what I meant by that it makes art more equal is that I can still make poems with ChatGPT. It doesn't make me a poet. I'm definitely not an artist if I do that, but it can be a new hobby for me. And maybe, well, poets is a good example as well, but let's think about composing. So, well, I happen to have some background in music as well, but I'm definitely not a composer. But I would have some basic understanding that I could start doing some little things with these applications. And I haven't been doing any composing in my life, but now this would be a very easy way for me to start. And then I would get better and better, and it might become as my hobby. I still wouldn't be a composer, or who knows if I got very good at it then one day, but that's very, very unlikely. So I think that there's a very important difference whether we're talking about art or we're talking about, well, of course, commercial use when there's companies who need music for their commercials or something like that. Is that art? Probably not. So they can make that much more efficient with these applications. But also, like, what comes to language, foreign languages. I actually just mentioned this to Mark earlier today that. Our foreign minister in Finland, she happens to speak fluent German. And that's very interesting that even this year, it makes a huge difference because she's been interviewed a lot in the German media. And this is the first time that Finnish foreign minister gets so much space in the German media, only because she speaks fluent German. And so even in the times of all these AI translators, it still matters that you really speak the language.
Does anyone want to pick up the military worry? That's a big one.
You're right.
It's always... It's often the elephant in the room that you have these big ethical frameworks and they mention all these different issues with bias and transparency and so forth, but they never talk about the military issues. So the EU AI Act doesn't mention anything about autonomous weapons or anything to do with that. So that's all stuff which is kind of out of scope. And there's a question, why is that out of scope? That's a big application of AI.
Yeah, I think AI has been a child of military research since its beginning. So it became that we have now the situation that more money is invested from private companies into AI research, maybe than even from military, surely then more than from universities. But for the longest time of history, military and university research has been most important for AI. Yeah, and now we have the situation that there were discussions in the so-called Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons. There they discussed how to get rid of lethal autonomous weapons. But only very few states agreed to sign contracts or to work towards contracts which would forbid the use of autonomous lethal weapons. But since Russia left this convention, these discussions basically stopped. And most countries which were able or which are able to produce these kinds of autonomous weapons agreed that they don't want to have these weapons, but they don't want to fall behind other countries. And so it's the logic of, what is Wettrüsten?
Escalation.
Escalation, yeah, competition. So the idea, even from the German government, is that one should have weapons which keep the human in the loop, but if necessary can be changed fast to be autonomous systems, because autonomy means that the situation can be dealt with faster, decisions can be taken faster, and if you have autonomous systems dealing with human-operated systems, then the human-operated systems will always be not as fast as the autonomous systems, and of course that's an argument to say we don't want to be weaker than our enemies, and then we need to be able to also switch our not autonomous systems to autonomous systems quickly if necessary.
So the gentleman here has a question, if you'd like to introduce it.
I've just one question concerning the use of generative AI chatbots in psychotherapy that you mentioned, because I don't know anything about it, but imagining the application of this kind of technology in this really sensitive area of human interaction is something that I find deeply frightening, and of course it's everybody knows that we have a serious issue in the society about mental health problems and way too little people who are capable of giving the much needed therapy. So a naive idea might be that this problem can be solved by serving all the people in need just with machines that will take care of them. But I'm afraid it will turn out the other way around, and these people make a very uncanny experience with being left to machines, and that drive them crazy.
It's a great question. Can you introduce yourself for the people at home?
Eberhard Ortland from the University of Münster, and I'm working here with the research group on access to cultural goods in times of digital change.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. So I fully agree that it's a very, very scary situation where we're at. But I have to say that it's not only risks, but there's also benefits out of this. And there's actually already, there has been this result that they can actually help some people. So they have been proved to alleviate symptoms of mild depression and anxiety. And then there are some other things that we can think of. So, for example, some patients or some people, they have things that they cannot tell anyone, not even their therapist. And especially if we're thinking about cultures, maybe in Japan or something like that, where mental health issues are a taboo. So maybe it's easier to confess to a machine. Like you mentioned Eliza, that was already the Eliza effect, that people were actually more, it was easier for them to confess to a machine when they knew that it's not a human being who knows about their, like, the most secret issues, whatever they might be.
They didn't imagine the kind of network of information processing behind the machine.
Yes. So now there's of course all the questions about privacy and and who's buying your data, who's selling it. So there are a lot of risks involved in this, and they come with some. I think in iPhone there is this app already. So young people are using this, and TikTok. There are these TikTok therapists, and it's also like very big market for this. And when the new generations, they are using their phones all the time, and then if they just use this for their therapy, and of course there's also this discourse in the therapy field that not just that we have a mental health crisis, but also it's something that is everybody's talking about it, and everybody wants to have therapy, and it's a very big, complicated issue. But yeah, thank you for mentioning that it is very scary and there's a lot of issues there.
So there was a novel written in the 1970s by the British author David Lodge, in which a character gets addicted to using ELIZA. It was a new technology at the time, and probably the first time that it appeared in fiction. And one of the other characters hacks ELIZA to recommend that the character who's using it commit suicide. And it was like, back in the 1970s when this was written, it was kind of like it was a dark satirical reflection on outsourcing our emotional needs to machines. But I think the fundamental observation that once we do that, once we anthropomorphize these machines and grant them the kinds of access into our inner lives that we only grant a select number of human beings over the course of our lives, we become blind to the threat surfaces that make them vectors of manipulation. And we've now seen this actually unfolding in the news. All of you have probably heard of, and some of you may have studied, the Cambridge Analytica scandal of 2018, when this British firm was found to have used a technique called neurotargeting to mess with the elections in the UK, in the US, in India, and various other nations around the world, and bragged about it on camera, as it turned out. One of the things most people who have only read a few articles don't know about Cambridge Analytica is that the data that were used to disinform and neurotarget vulnerable voters were not just derived from the Facebook quizzes that everybody was wringing their hands about. One of the other major sources of data that Cambridge Analytica used came from a mental health application called GLOO, G-L-O-O, that was principally used by churches and other worship organizations to facilitate survivors of sexual abuse communicating privately with one another, and to facilitate communications between clergy and the lay people who were members of their congregations. And this app manufacturer, GLOO, collected all these data and then basically gave it to Cambridge Analytica, which used it to build their profile of a vulnerable, neurotic voter who would be susceptible to fear-inducing disinformation. So I think, the devil is in the details. Without question, as P was pointing out, like, you can clinically demonstrate that talking to anthropomorphizing a machine and talking to them as you would to a therapist or a clergy person can be enormously beneficial for an individual. But until we recognize that those machines are fundamentally insecure and there's no way to prevent the data that we feed into them from eventually leaking out and being used toward other purposes, including ones that de-anonymize and victimize us, I think we can't have a complete assessment as to their net social benefit or cost.
That's great. We've got a question from the gentleman here in the center. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Max Sachau from the University of Siegen. I worked on theoretical philosophy, process metaphysics, so I'm way out of my depth here, but anyways, I still have two questions. So the first is for Aram, who, like, you talked much about, or in the beginning you talked about the monopolization of these data companies, And what I find fascinating is, I mean, they are talking about this like data mining, and this metaphor somehow suggests that like there is this coal deposit or something, and they just mine it. But really, I mean, in a way, this is data that is provided by people in a way, and in some sense, a product of collective labor, or yeah, like from everybody who chatted to everybody like wrote articles and so forth. I mean, there might also be then a class perspective on like this type of monopolization. So I just wanted to pick your brains about this. And the other question was for Manuela on the the tools perspective on whether, so more of a metaphysical question. So I think like in the early days of philosophy, of course, like Plato already reflected on the invention of writing and how it will change us, and we will forget everything and so forth. And I mean, it didn't turn out true, but again, I mean, it changed our thinking, I guess. But so what I wondered a little bit about is like, you seem to think of AI as like this sort of tool which can help us, but you shouldn't really anthropomorphize it in any way. But I just wanted to hear your thoughts about communication. So whether you think we are actually communicating with something, or whether like the new tool, the AI, whatever it is providing us, is a sort of communication, but a communication without like a partner who is intelligent. Like, yeah, so for instance, I mean, then it would be somewhat similar to writing. I mean, I can communicate still with Plato in just reading his books. I mean, they are still there. And in a way, when I'm reading them, I am anthropomorphizing the text in thinking that Plato is talking to me. I mean, like as if he was like giving his dialogues to me. And so maybe that also plays a role that, I mean, yeah, the tools somehow transcend this pure tool perspective, I guess.
I can answer the first question very briefly, and I'm interested in hearing the longer answer to the second question. Metaphors matter, as you point out. All this data is the new oil, data is the new coal, is largely nonsense. It doesn't actually match the affordances of data. What is being monopolized is not data, it's processing power. Processing power is a finite resource that is self-exponentializing. So somebody with twice as much processing power as somebody else is not twice as powerful, they're 4 times as powerful. And it's finite because it comes at a cost. It comes at the cost of generating the power, and it comes at the cost of the ecological and economic knock-on effects of accumulating that kind of power. And we have a tiny handful of data monopolists right now who are responsible for 99.999% of all generative AI.
Okay, the communication question. I mean, of course, if you ask a question and get an answer, then it's a kind of communication. And the question is it a different kind of communication than asking, I don't know, a pocket calculator, and you have a calculation and you get an answer, and it's not a very interesting kind of communications from the social point of view. Yeah, I mean, there are several reports of people having intense discussions with large language models and even coming to the conclusion that these systems must have a kind of consciousness and so on. And these are not stupid people, so they're not simple-minded people or so, that are really, that are scientists, which somehow come to the conclusion, maybe after a long night debating with a large language model, that there is someone on the other side communicating. But I think, yeah, it's always like going to this trap these systems pose for us. And what I hear more and more often from people communicating a lot with these systems is that they become boring in a way. I mean, the companies issuing these systems have to take care that they answer in a very decent way, and that make the answers of these systems very medium-like. As you also mentioned, they are always converging to the most probable answer. And I hear it from a lot of people that the answers get more and more boring, frustrating, that it sounds always the same. And people have this tendency to first jump on these new technologies and be fascinated, even artists. When I talked to artists maybe 2 or 3 years ago, a lot of them were fascinated, saying we are now going to find new ways of expressing ourselves together with the machines. And now a lot of them say, oh, ChatGPT is so boring and always answering the same stuff. I can't hear that anymore. And maybe that is a very sympathetic thing of people always going one step further. So I think this communication is an illusion. Evolution made us to follow this illusion very easily. But nevertheless, it is an illusion, and then sometimes it is also helpful when the systems give us strange and wrong and inconclusive answers, because they remind us that they are not people somehow trapped in this machine, but that there are systems which are fascinating and which can do fascinating things, but are nevertheless work in a very different, I would not use this word thinking, but work in a very different way than we do.
Just very quickly, you can actually have an even creepier illusion with Plato, because you can actually build Plato. So you can actually feed all his dialogues to like replica, and then you can have a conversation. You can chat with Plato. So.
Have you come across the Daniel Dennett, the synthetic version of Daniel Dennett? So Eric Stritchgivel and a number of collaborators built the synthetic Dennett. You can have a synthetic Quine or whoever your favorite philosopher is, and have long conversations with them. But yeah, well, on that rather uncanny prospect, I think that we should probably bring the evening to an end. I want to be respectful of all of your time. I want to thank you very much for the absolutely excellent questions. There's a lot more to say here, but I would like us all to thank our 3 speakers very much indeed for the contribution.
And let's thank Mark as well.
Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Hope you have a wonderful sleep, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow.